Why the Roman Empire Fell, A Warning from the Past, by H.G.FASS. Introduction. The decline and eventual collapse of the Western Roman Empire has been attributed to a variety of factors: economic decay, military overextension, external invasions, and political instability. Yet one of the most decisive, though often debated, catalysts was the rise of Christianity. This new religion not only altered the spiritual foundations of Rome, but also eroded the traditional cultural and religious systems that had previously sustained social unity, civic identity, and European continuity. Christianity functioned as a total cultural revolution, advocating what was essentially a foreign monotheistic worldview, one developed from Jewish traditions of the ancient Near East, in place of the pluralistic Greco-Roman heritage. In rejecting the gods, values, and cultural identity of classical Europe, Christianity undermined Rome's cohesion and created a framework of internal disunity and self-rejection that hastened the empire's demise. The centrality of traditional religion to Roman identity. Rome's religion was never merely private devotion, it was the foundation of civic life. The cults of Jupiter, Mars, Vesta, and the ancestral spirits, Lares and Penates, were tied to Roman virtues of discipline, pietas, courage, and duty. Religious festivals coincided with agricultural cycles, military campaigns, and political rituals, ensuring an overall unity of cultural expression and social order. Polytheism allowed for a wide variety of diversity and tolerance of conquered peoples' gods and intellectual spiritual experiences, knitting the empire together through shared ritual, even as practical differences in worship were preserved. Cicero articulated this connection between Roman religion and Roman greatness, claiming in De Natura Deorum that Roman success was due to religionem quae est instita pietas ergas Deos, or reverence toward the gods. The Roman people believed their empire endured by divine favor, a contract, the pax deorum, maintained through sacrifices and rites. To cast this system aside was not a matter of private choice. It was a rejection of the keystone binding the empire: Christianity as a foreign import and cultural antithesis. Christianity entered this world as an uncompromising counter-religion, one that explicitly forbade participation in Roman cults and festivals. Early Christians refused to honor the gods, the emperor, or Rome's ancestral rites, which made them appear, not without reason, as subversives to the polity itself. Unlike polytheistic traditions, which easily syncretized, Christianity was exclusive. Worshipping Christ meant denouncing Jupiter, Apollo, Minerva, and all the others as false or demonic. Lactantius wrote, "All those who are called gods have no divinity, they are empty names." Such an attitude severed continuity with 1,000 years of Roman culture and thousands of years of earlier European identity. Moreover, Christianity bore little resemblance to European traditions. Its symbols, scriptures, and founding figures all came from Judea. Its heroes were not philosophers, heroes, or statesmen, the archetypes of European culture, but rather religious martyrs, hermit ascetics, and intelligible zealots. The Christian ideal was one of iconoclasm triumphant, a total rejection of the past, and to openly despise pagan Rome's pride and accomplishments. From the Roman perspective, this was a radical inversion of their ancestral values. The state-endorsed cultural revolution. The tipping point came when Christianity moved from persecuted minority to state religion. Constantine's Edict of Milan in 313 legalized the faith, but Theodosius's Edict of Thessalonica in 380 CE made Nicene Christianity the empire's sole official religion. In doing so, the state became an active agent in dismantling Rome's traditional culture. Pagan temples were closed or destroyed. The Olympic Games were abolished. Augury and sacrifices criminalized. The renowned Serapeum of Alexandria, a major center of learning, was demolished by Christian mobs in 391, with encouragement from the authorities. As the Roman Empire gradually transformed from a polytheistic society into a predominantly Christian one, pagan statues and temples became central targets for destruction. Statues of gods, emperors, or legendary heroes were not regarded as benign works of art, but rather as dangerous symbols of idolatry. Early Christian authorities and zealot groups believed these images contained demonic influence and encouraged pagan worship. To neutralize these symbols, faces were especially attacked. The eyes were gouged out to blind the deity, and noses or mouths were broken to stop the statue from symbolically breathing or speaking. Such acts were not simply vandalism, but spiritual warfare, an attempt to prove the dominance of the Christian faith by visibly disabling rival gods. Mobs of Christian converts, often spurred on by bishops and other religious leaders during times of heightened religious fervor, frequently swarmed temples and shrines. With hammers and chisels, they toppled or defaced sacred statuary as part of purges against paganism, particularly in the 4th and 5th centuries CE, after Christianity became the favored and later official religion of the empire. For example, during the reign of Theodosius I, who forbade pagan practices, many groups of zealots actively destroyed temples, images, and cult objects. This widespread iconoclasm is a key reason why so many ancient sculptures reaching us today bear scars of deliberate facial mutilation rather than simply incidental damage. The destruction carried an added purpose. It visually proclaimed the triumph of Christianity over the old order. Rather than merely discarding pagan statues, zealots often left them partially intact but mutilated, creating a visible reminder of the impotence of ancestral gods. This form of public religious theatre was deeply symbolic. By stripping away the humanizing features of gods or rulers, the zealots reduced once powerful images to inert lumps of stone, stripped of their former authority. Much of the surviving Roman, Greek, and Egyptian statuary owes its battered appearance to these waves of early Christian iconoclasm, layered upon centuries of later neglect, reuse, and environmental damage. Edward Gibbon, in The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, remarked of this process. The ruin of paganism in the age of Theodosius is perhaps the only example of the total extirpation of any ancient and popular superstition. In other words, Rome committed cultural suicide by erasing its own roots, Christianity and the weakening of Roman civilization. The political and military consequences of this cultural transformation were profound. Christianity directed attention away from civic duty to otherworldly salvation. Where Rome had once exalted military valor and civic loyalty, Christian authors like Augustine urged that the true civitas, city or citizenship, was not Rome, but the city of God. To the Roman soldier or citizen, their empire became devalued, mere dust compared to the promise of a divine eternity beyond. The discouragement of martial vigor, civic loyalty, and the disdain for worldly endeavors eroded the ethos that had built and defended the empire. While Germanic tribes pressed against its frontiers, Rome's unity of spirit was dissolving from within. The transformation of classical education into theology pulled intellectual energy away from the sciences, philosophy, and administration that had sustained Rome's material order. Christianity's imposed self-hatred of European identity. One of the most destructive aspects of this revolution was its insistence that Rome's ancestral culture was not only obsolete, but actually sinful. Christian polemicists characterized classical philosophy as empty vanity, pagan literature as corrupting, art and statuary as idolatrous. Jerome, in a famous letter, rebuked himself for reading Cicero when he should have studied scripture. Thus, the greatest monuments of Roman intellectual culture were neglected or destroyed because they were seen as dangerous distractions. This rejection amounted to a cultural self-hatred, where the European inheritance of Homer, Virgil, Cicero, Epicurus, Aristotle, and countless others was cast aside as demonic or worthless. In embracing a foreign creed with a fundamentally different orientation, Rome renounced its own essence. The result was not merely religious transformation, but civilizational decline. The fall and aftermath. By the late 4th and 5th centuries, the empire was vulnerable to barbarian incursions, its old unifying culture shattered. When Alaric sacked Rome in 410 CE, Augustine denied that Rome's gods had failed, but rather emphasized that Rome itself was of no importance compared to salvation. The psychological acceptance of imperial collapse was made possible by Christianity's displacement of Roman identity itself. The Dark Ages that followed epitomized the destructive consequences of this revolution. Literacy collapsed, universities and schools decayed, art and architecture lost technique and scope, and the once flourishing philosophical and scientific traditions were largely forgotten. Where Rome had been cosmopolitan and vibrant, early medieval Europe became insular, fearful, and preoccupied primarily with theology. Conclusion. The fall of the Roman Empire was not simply an accident of external pressures or material weakness. It was a cultural revolution from within that prepared the way for collapse. By destroying traditional European religion, dismantling civic rituals, and denigrating the classical heritage, Christianity stripped Rome of its soul. A civilization does not survive on infrastructure and armies alone. It requires an animating spirit, a coherent identity, and institutions that transmit these values across generations. The Roman world once had this vitality in its polytheistic traditions and its civic religion, which supported virtues of courage, discipline, and duty. Christianity replaced these with an ethic of religious intolerance, iconoclasm, and a new focus on otherworldliness, whose rewards came beyond the grave, redirecting energy and loyalty away from Rome itself to a transcendent ideal that explicitly rejected Rome's ancestral glory and ultimate meaning. Thus, what resulted was a culture suffering from a crisis of identity. A people taught to despise their ancestral gods, art, philosophy, and civic duties in favor of a faith born in a foreign land and antagonistic to much of their own past. Rome, alienated from itself, became a hollowed-out shell, no longer able to command the loyalties and energies that had once made it the master of the world. By the time the empire was fatally pressured by Germanic migrations and internal weakness, it no longer had the cultural vigor to resist. In this sense, Christianity was not merely an incidental feature of Rome's decline, but a decisive cause. The empire fell because it ceased to be culturally Roman. In erasing the traditions that had sustained Europe for centuries, Christianity contributed not only to the collapse of the greatest empire the West had ever known, but also inaugurated an age of uncertainty and darkness. Though later medieval Europe would synthesize aspects of classical and Christian thought, the direct inheritance of Rome was irreversibly broken. Thus, Rome's fall illustrates a wider civilizational truth. When a people are induced to despise its own culture and to trade it for an alien creed that severs continuity with the past, decline becomes inevitable. When a society turns against its own cultural identity, the consequences are often far-reaching. A civilization's symbols, traditions, and shared narratives serve as the glue that binds disparate groups together into a coherent whole. If these are rejected wholesale, the community risks dismantling the very foundations that give it meaning and continuity. Hatred of one's own heritage can manifest in the denunciation of cultural achievements, the erasure of historical memory, or even the destruction of art and monuments. When these acts are pursued, not with a critical, but with a corrosive spirit, they fracture collective confidence in the past and leave little to inspire confidence in the future. A people who internalize contempt for their own culture often find themselves adrift, stripped of values to guide them through challenges. Without a sense of belonging, social cohesion crumbles. Civic institutions grow weaker as citizens no longer feel loyalty to shared ideals, and competing factions seek to impose their own narrow visions. In many cases, this accelerating fragmentation has historically opened the door to decline, because societies with no unified identity are less able to defend themselves politically, culturally, or militarily against stronger and more confident rivals. This is not to say that cultures must freeze themselves in the past or reject all change. Healthy evolution allows traditions to be adapted to new circumstances. But when reform hardens into hostility and the present despises the memory of the past, the society effectively cuts off its own roots. Severed from the reservoir of meaning and strength that sustained earlier generations, a civilization that despises itself invites exhaustion and collapse. A more enduring path lies in finding balance, recognizing faults and limits in inherited traditions, while still honoring the shared achievements that make communal life possible and give future generations something positive to build upon. Final note: the intent of this documentary is not to denigrate or denounce Christianity in any way. Rather, it seeks to examine European history with honesty and candor. The tumultuous events that unfolded during the decline of Rome, marked by Christian iconoclasm and mob violence, can often overshadow what were, in fact, the core teachings of Christ, which emphasize love, compassion, and forgiveness. It is crucial to differentiate between the actions of individuals and groups who may have misinterpreted and hijacked these teachings for their own cynical political ambitions, and the profound moral and ethical framework that Christianity offers. By exploring this historical context, we can better appreciate how the complexities of faith and its expressions have influenced societal dynamics throughout the ages. In an ironic twist of fate, it is now Christianity that finds itself facing the brunt of ruthless iconoclasm in the modern age. Various forces, ranging from radical Marxist ideologies to extremist interpretations of Islam and others, have engaged in efforts to attack Christian symbols, values, and institutions. This contemporary cultural conflict reveals a troubling parallel to the iconoclastic movements of the past, suggesting that the battle over identity and belief remains as relevant today as it was in earlier epochs in human history. By reflecting on these themes, we hope to foster a deeper understanding of how faith, culture, and history intertwine, ultimately advocating for a deeper discourse that promotes respect and reconciliation rather than division. In doing so, we honor the core essence of Christianity's teachings on love and compassion, while honestly grappling with the complex legacies it has left in the world. A healthy civilizational self-identity, woven from a rich shared tapestry of community, religion, history, meaning, and purpose, are essential for the flourishing of nations, peoples, and individuals alike. Such an identity fosters a sense of belonging and interconnectedness, allowing societies to navigate challenges with resilience and unity. It nurtures the values of empathy, cooperation, and mutual respect, which are vital for healthy social cohesion and progress. When communities are anchored in shared beliefs and a common purpose, they are better equipped to confront adversity, ultimately creating community where individuals can thrive.